Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot with integration of Java and Spring Boot applications. So we are going to discuss about few things about GitHub Copilot. The first thing is what is GitHub Copilot itself. Usually the documentation claims it's an AI pair programmer. It's like some seasoned programmer sitting beside you and guiding you to how to code or how to solve your problem. Okay, so the first thing we are going to discuss about is what is GitHub Copilot and also how can we leverage it in our development activity for maximum productivity. So as we are all know, AI is going to dominate in few years, right? But it's not going to take away our jobs and it will help us to maximize our productivity by using these AI tools. So in this session, we are going to see how to leverage it for our development activity so that you will get more benefited using these AI tools. And yeah, we know right earlier if you are trying to develop something, right? We don't remember as we developers, we remember how to do the task, but we don't know what is the syntax and what is the particular syntax we need to write for a particular problem, right? We know how to solve the problem, but syntax will struggle a lot. So in that case, we used to go to Google or Stack Overflow to fix the errors now and then. But with the use of this GitHub Copilot, your AI companion, you no need to use Google or Stack Overflow to fix your errors. The other thing is we don't need to search for a lot of web pages to get the solution, right? If you get a small issue now, you will go to Stack Overflow, you have to go n number of web pages and to find the solution, right? We will search a lot. And even you find a solution, that solution don't have the proper answer, and some cases even though it has proper answer we just simply copy pasting, we don't know what is happening inside and we don't know the explanation and you don't understand the explanation even they provided there, right? But in case of if you use this copilot, it simplifies that explanation. Even for a junior developer he can easily understand at his own pace, and it will help a lot by providing a single solution instead of going for multiple solutions which will confuse us, right? So without any further ado, we'll go with what is GitHub Copilot and we'll see its advantages. So, as we discussed earlier, it's an AI pair programmer. It's your AI companion or a seasoned developer sitting beside you and helping us with writing any programming language. So, you can choose any programming language from Java, Spring Boot, and Python, even Scala, right? So, you can use any programming language using this GitHub Copilot and it will help you. And even it helps in DevOps and command line commands also. For example, in DevOps, we need to write few scripts even through Java, sorry, even through your Python scripts or your Groovy scripts. And in that case, it will be useful. And also in command line tools, right? For example, you have AWS CLI and you don't remember how to invoke a Lambda or how to invoke an EC2 instance using AWS CLI commands or even simple Linux commands to open a file, right? To see the timestamps, to sort the file. So these kind of commands, right? It is very hard to remember. But if you leverage the functionality of GitHub Copilot, it will help you get most of it because you don't need to remember all these things. GitHub Copilot will help you to find out these solutions. Now, you may wonder how this GitHub Copilot is doing these kind of things, right? So the answer is it was powered by OpenAI Codex. So what is Codex, right? A Codex and generative AI model which trained on massive code base which was publicly available on the internet, and also NLT. Here NLT means natural language text. Okay, this OpenAI, I think you have already heard about OpenAI. Yeah, most of the guys are familiar with ChatGPT, and I know some of the guys are using Gemini or Bard, which was Google's version of ChatGPT, right? And what are these? These are AI. So this AI is nothing but a model, right? It's a machine learning model which was trained on the data. So the data now is available on publicly domain, there's public domains. For example, the Stack Overflows, Google. right? They will get all the data from that domains and train these models. So our OpenAI Codex, right, with the help of Microsoft and the OpenAI, they build their own model and which was trained on massive code base and also the natural language text. Okay, so since it learns, right, it learns this kind of patterns from the public domain. It will provide you a sophisticated answer which will most of the times works for you. Okay, and you can see, right, it integrates with most of all popular IDEs like VS Code or STS and IntelliJ, etc. So no need to worry, right? You don't need to install a separate software for this. You can use your regular development IDEs, like for example, if you are using an Visual Studio Code, and it was the best thing, right? It was the best editor with this GitHub Copilot, and even you can use STS and IntelliJ, right, etc., etc., for your integration with GitHub Copilot, and you can use it easily. Okay, now how it will work, right? We know it is powered by a open AI codex, but how it will works, no? For example, if you see this line, right, it is saying it will understand the context of the code. So for example, if we have a code and the open AI or the copilot, the GitHub copilot understand the context of the code. That means what inside the code and what is the logic inside the code. GitHub copilot will understand that by looking at the piece of the code, like a method or class or block, etc. It will scan that code and provide auto completion and code suggestions. This is the first use case we can say. You don't need to worry about to write the code. It will see your method name or class name or the block name and it will complete your code, right? It will show you some auto suggestions, auto completion options so that you can leverage that feature. And even, right, it can generate the code or entire code context by just looking at a function or class name itself. For example, I have given my function name as prime number. So it will create, right, inside it will suggest code, right? It will give a code suggestion for you, the entire code itself. And you can use that auto completion feature to get all the code. And it will help us in documentation. This is another use case, right? You don't need to, if you have an n number of files, and if you want to document those n number of files, right, it is very hard because a 10 number of developers worked on the same project, and each person introduced maybe a 5 or 6 files, right, and we don't know what they have do inside. The application is working fine, but we don't know what is the inside, right? And to maintain that, we need to documentation, and documentation is very hard to do, right? It's a very tedious process and developers don't like documentation, right? So in that case, this GitHub Copilot will write your documentation within a few minutes. So if you take one sprint to complete documentation itself earlier, now it will take 1 hour to complete your all the documentation work by using this GitHub Copilot. Here the documentation in the sense you will create what what is there inside the code line by line, like explanation, and even you can add comments on top of the code, right? For the junior developers or the upcoming developers who are going to take that code for future work, right? And even explains the complex piece of code of the existing projects. Yeah, so it will add the current project you are working on, the comments or documentation. And if you have any existing projects, right, you can leverage GitHub Copilot feature. It will add documentation or comments on top of your code, right? Even it's a very complex piece of code. GitHub Copilots understand that and it will give you comments what we are doing inside that code. So it was very useful for any developer, right, who are trying to work on any existing projects which is not documented well, and we don't know what is happening inside, and it's hard to understand what is going on. So in that case, you can leverage this GitHub Copilot feature and take your piece of code and ask your GitHub Copilot, your AI companion or AI pair programmer, what is happening inside. And he will provide you the insights, what is happening inside, why this method used, and what are the inputs, outputs, right? Those kind of. each line to line description and a high level description, whatever the way you want, the GitHub Copilot provides you. And it has a feature like GitHub Copilot chart, which was basically like a chat GPT, but specialized in a coding related issues. So if you use this GitHub Copilot feature in your development task, right, in your IDE, usually it will comes up with two things. One is GitHub Copilot, and another one is GitHub Copilot chart. So the GitHub Copilot helps in suggesting our auto completions and code suggestions, right? It will understand the code context and provide the code suggestions, right? Auto completion things. But what is the use of GitHub Copilot chart, right? You can directly interact with your GitHub Copilot and ask questions to it. And if you ask questions, it will do fun. Even you can open your code on one tab and you select a particular piece of code and ask the GitHub Copilot chart to explain that particular code. It will explain each and every steps. So these two things are very important. One is the GitHub Copilot itself and the GitHub Copilot chart. And currently these two are only available for VS Code. The chart feature is only available for VS Code, and STS and other IDEs, right? Currently it is not available, but in future maybe they will add. But as of now, we don't rely on these IDEs, right? STS and IntelliJ. And if you are familiar with these STS and IntelliJ, you can still use your GitHub Copilot, but the chart is not available. That means you are missing so much fun there, right? You are missing so much fun. Literally, I'm saying the GitHub Copilot chart will helps a lot. So if you are using STS or IntelliJ, try to use VS Code for some days until this feature rollbacks to STS. Okay. And the other important thing is it helps us based on prompt, generates the steps to solve problem, debug the code, and even generates the entire code. The GitHub Copilot chart, which will take a prompt and generates the steps, even it generates the steps to solve the problem, and even it debug the code, and even generates the entire code for your code context or question. So these are the advantages you have to remember. I know we have covered a lot here, but yeah, take a look at here and understand, right? The GitHub Copilot is your companion. He's going to help you write your code. He's going to help you while you are stuck, right? While you are debugging, while you want to write any tests, right? You want to review it, you want to fix it. In all these cases, GitHub Copilot will help you like a seasoned developer sitting beside you, and your workflow will be more efficient than ever. Now we have covered all the advantages of GitHub Copilot, right? But everything comes with own pros and its own cons also. So we are currently more optimistic and looking towards only the advantages, but now we'll see the pessimistic side or disadvantages of GitHub Copilot. The first thing is generated code might not be reliable. True, because why it's not reliable, right? The GitHub Copilot generates code from the data which is publicly available on the internet. So it's learned from those patterns. And whatever the question you have asked it, it will fetch the answer from those patterns. And sometimes in the publicly available domain code should not follow the standards. So in that case, your code not the code generated by the GitHub Copilot might not be reliable. Most of the cases it is best, but some cases definitely you will see this issue. And the second thing is the generated code might not follow best coding standards, right? The coding quality should not meet your coding quality. That thing also we need to ensure. And why, right? We have already discussed since it works on the patterns, it learns from the internet. So we need to tweak the code and modify some places to ensure it meets the coding standards and quality, right? So there was an issue with reliability and standards. So that the human interaction is much more needed to review the code and to ensure it's meeting the coding standards. And the another thing is improper prompting, right? Means it might not be understand the requirements or context properly, right? So if ChatGPT or this copilots, the GitHub Copilot don't understand your requirements, right? You are unable to provide the proper prompt to it, or sometimes the GitHub Copilot itself is misunderstood what you have provided. So in that case, it will give you the wrong piece of code which was out of the context. This can be possible, right? So the prompting should be very precise and it should be understandable by Copilot. Okay, the other con is it offline way it won't work. For example, if you are working in a project and which don't have any internet connection, in that case, GitHub Copilot won't work for you because you need an active internet connection. So you have a dependency on the internet. So without internet, GitHub Copilot won't work. So that is also one of the disadvantages. Now, since the GitHub Copilot mostly depends on the prompts, prompt engineering is required. So which requires to learn this prompt engineering to an effectively use the GitHub Copilot. So that means if you want to use GitHub Copilot effectively, you have to learn this prompt engineering. So people like us, we came us from Telugu medium or their own mediums, right? They're mostly familiar with their own language other than English, right? They usually get this grammatical mistakes, right? So people has to learn this writing skill, the prompting skill, right? How to correctly provide input to the GitHub Copilot so that you can get the most effective answer from it. So this is also a skill which we need to learn. This skills won't get in a minute, right? You won't get the skill in a minute or month. You have to progress through your journey, then only you will understand how to give proper prompts which will give you the effective answer what you are looking for. So the prompt engineering has a learning curve and that should be completed before getting the effectiveness or efficientness of your GitHub Copilot, right? So this is also one of the con. And the other thing is the IP, that is intellectual property and licensing issue. Whether it is ethical to use the publicly available domain code. Is there any copyright issues? Yeah, definitely. If you are using someone's code and they have some copyright on their code, right? If you are using the same piece of code and which will result in copyright issues or licensing issues, right? Since the model trained on the internet public domain or data, we need to be careful regarding the copyright issues. Okay, so in terms of IP and licensing issues, we need to be carefully, thoroughly check your code before we are deploying our code to any public domain. Okay, and the last one is so because of these concerns, right? The thing what we need to do as a human interaction, which was very essential here, we can't we can't depend on GitHub Copilot entirely, right? Here, the human interaction is completely necessary to ensure the code generated to the Copilot meets the project requirements and security policies and coding quality standards, right? Without these things, if GitHub Copilot deploys the code and if you do something, right, then we will get into some issues. Even the security issues are coding quality issues. So we need to ensure these disadvantages are done by the humans. Then only we can leverage the functionality or the effectiveness of the GitHub Copilot in our project.